Turning now to funding. We just talked a lot about the economic impact of this war, about how the war is going tactically. But remember, wars have to be paid for, and it has to be paid for by all of us. And now the bill is starting to come due. Let's go ahead and put this up here on the screen. Jake Sherman over at Punchbowl, one of the most tapped-in congressional journalists in the U.S. Here's what he writes. With war raging in the Middle East, the DHS is still shut down. The storm bearing down on the East Coast. Congress is returning to session today amid an array of problems, priorities, and deadlines. Oil prices are at $100 a barrel. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. 13 Americans are dead. But let's get to the headline. The White House, Pentagon, and congressional leaders have already begun talks about supplemental funding for the Iran war. We don't expect any requests to hit Capitol Hill this week, but the two sides are trying to figure out how to pass it. We have had several sources suggest the package may carry a price tag of $100 billion or more. Lawmakers see this as potentially the last must-pass bill of the year and may have to try and attach their own costly proposals. Reconciliation, the best option for GOP leaders. There is no chance Democrats would allow anything to pass without a vote on ending the conflict or reining in Trump's freedom to operate, but any new spending will have to be offset with cuts elsewhere. So this would be the worst of all political worlds for the White House. They would have to put $100 billion into reconciliation, and they have to cut $100 billion from the rest of the federal budget. They've already stripped it as far as they could go in the last reconciliation package. So who wants to bet where that money's coming from? $100 billion. Let's be clear here about this $100 billion. What is it about? It's about a supplemental funding request for the immense amounts that have already been spent. This isn't just about munitions, and I'm going to get to some of that here in a little bit. Don't forget, so we talked about in our A block, the carrier, right? The carrier of the fire. Guess what the last carrier fire cost to repair? $70 million. $70 million just to repair the last fire, similar fire back in 2008. I was just looking at that. Let's talk a little bit about jet fuel. Let's talk about, which is currently trading at $200 a barrel. Let's talk about the $200 million a month or so that it costs to send a single carrier strike group. Let's talk about the cost of diverting a Marine Expeditionary Force through the Straits of Malacca all the way over and then potentially having to deploy. Let's talk about all of the new ISR and the intelligence people, all the reservists. I know a couple of reservists. They've all been called up. They're working night shifts now at the Pentagon. These are people who not usually were working, right? And so now everybody's starting to get paid. All of these reservists are all over there. Remember, a vast majority of the people who've been killed already in the war were actually called up from the Army Reserve or from the Air Force Reserve. So we've got, I would estimate the current true costs of the war already to probably be about $100 billion. And that doesn't even mention the interceptors and the drones and all that stuff, which, by the way, this is my, counterintuitive. I actually do think we need to pay for all of that, but it puts everybody in a bind here where, yeah, we should pay, because obviously we need real defense readiness, like South Korea is out there, their economy is getting destroyed. The president basically declared emergency this morning, talking about, he went on the airwaves, he's like, we have a serious problem. Sri Lanka, I don't know if you saw this, Sri Lanka, Wednesdays are now off. They're like, we're not working Wednesdays to save oil, to save gas. It's a disaster in the rest of the world. But in our economy, it's just going to manifest in high prices. And then politically, how could any Democrat, or honestly, even some of the anti-war Republicans, how can you vote for the war? Because it's not congressionally authorized, and it's basically a free hand to keep the economic punishment of our own country going for as long as possible. Yeah. This is why you don't get into a war without congressional authorization in the first place. If you authorize it, then you better fund it, okay? Yeah. We need well-articulated strategic goals, and I'm going to brace everybody. The way that this is all going to play out is they're going to say they want us to leave our men in uniform hanging. Oh, you complained about the interceptors, but you don't want to replace the interceptors. No. We can talk about that. We can talk about that strategy. But in the interim, right now, this is about a free hand to keep this BS war going. And I think that everyone really needs to brace, because this will be a titanic political fight.
That's what they're already using that rhetoric with politicians who say, on the Democratic side, who say they oppose funding the war. Like, how can you leave our service members at risk? And, and some of the Democrats have said, like Alyssa Slotkin, she's like, well, we're in it now, so we have to support them. I think most of, if not all of those Democrats, aside from John Fetterman, who's lost cause. But anyway, I think they will all change their tune, because what you're going to be signing up for is literally making the case to Americans, we're going to cut your health care. We're going to cut SNAP. We're going to cut Head Start. We're going to cut like the things that actually benefit the American people to fund this war that is not authorized, that no one asked for, that, prior to launch had like a 20, 30% support rating. You're going to ask people to give up real things that they benefit from the federal government in order to fund that war effort. You're not asking the rich to pay anymore. You're not asking for that. You're not asking the, military industrial complex that are getting rich. You're not asking those corporate entities to pay anymore to fund this absolute disaster. No. That is going to come. It is going to skin off the back of a population that has already been screwed. And then you're going to pay again at the gas pump. And then you're going to pay again when you go to the grocery store and the costs are passed through to you. And you're going to pay again when companies do, greedflation like they did before and recognize like, oh, there's an inflation going on. I can add even more to the price of my goods and I can get away with it because we know they did that during COVID and they will surely do it again. So that is who is going to actually pay for this war. Good luck. Good luck making that case to the American people. This war right now is as popular as it will ever be. And the best polling I've seen for it is 50-50. Mm-hmm. The best polling I've seen for it. Compare that to the Iraq war. There was overwhelming support at the beginning. The Afghanistan war, even more, was like 90% support for the Afghanistan war at the beginning. Wars do not get more popular over time, especially not the way we fight them, where we end up getting bogged down in a quagmire, losing massive amounts of treasure and lives and creating a gigantic mess, which this thing already is. So to your point about the cost, I saw an estimate that just in munitions expenditure, it's been over $12 billion.
Yeah.
Just that. And so whatever they're briefing Congress where they're like, oh, it's been $11 billion so far, that is total and complete bullshit. It has already cost so much more than that. But yet when you go to the government, when you say, could we maybe have healthcare like the rest of the world? Oh, no, we can't afford it. Could we, get some support in terms of affordable housing or build on social housing? Oh, no, I'm sorry, we can't afford it. When it comes to funding the war effort, there was always endless cash, an endless number of politicians ready to sign up to foot the bill, to push that to the taxpayers to fund the latest adventure for the military-industrial complex and the war profiteers.
I'll also just show you guys like the problem in the way that we fight. Let's put C2 up here on the screen. Okay, so this is a great Wall Street Journal story about these Reaper drones. And by the way, everybody get familiar with this stuff because these are the arguments that they're all going to be making whenever they're asking for more money. Yep. So U.S. Reaper drones take the fight to Iran, but at a cost. So they talk about Iranian Shahed drones have gotten attention. The U.S. is raging its own drone war, right? So these are surveillance drones, widespread strikes, MQ-9 Reaper drone. They've been used in the battle, attacking hundreds of targets, surveillance, and they are able to strike. The U.S. military has done little to highlight the role, but the telltale indications of their operations are evident in a lot of the videos that CENTCOM has been releasing. They're flown remotely in the U.S., they were used a lot during the War on Terror. Well, a current estimate puts it that some 10% of the entire fleet has now been lost as a result of not just this conflict with Iran, but I missed this. It was also with the Houthis. Now, the unit cost of each one of these drones is about $30 million. Wow. Compare that to the unit cost of the Iranian Shahed drone between 20 to 100,000, depending on.
I saw an estimate that was seven.
It depends. So I actually listened to an analysis on this. It's pretty interesting. The short range ones are cheap. Obviously, those are like $7,000. Mm-hmm. Apparently, this is the Ukrainian model. The Ukrainians have these like really tiny ones, which will only fly like, a couple hundred yards. Obviously, those are super cheap. The Iranian ones that are capable of hitting like Dubai and stuff, those are more expensive, obviously, because they have to fly several thousand kilometers. But regardless, we're talking about a $30 million drone versus a $20,000, $30,000 drone. All right, the math doesn't math whenever it looks like this. Now, the argument is going to be, well, what we have to do is we have to top up, this stuff. Instead, really what we should do, and we should do this with everything, the Pentagon bureaucracy, is take a look at the Ukrainian conflict, the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Take a look at Iran. What's the lesson? Is that cheap, easy to produce, mass producible stuff is always going to be massively beneficial in a long-term engagement. And the problem with the U.S. military, I've talked about, it's like a Rolls-Royce engine. Like, it's super expensive and it functions at a really, really high level. But when it breaks, massively expensive to fix. You need all these mechanics and technicians and very hard to produce. Did you know, so Tomahawk missiles, we fired untold numbers of them. Do you know how many that we produced last year? 57. We've fired several hundred now so far over several years of Tomahawk missiles. There's one facility in Arizona which makes them all. One.
Wow.
That's it. I mean, you've got no decentralized industrial base, nothing. So if there's even a fire there, it's over. right? And think about that too from a perspective of like our own vulnerabilities. So when they come for this supplemental, the demand needs to be, no, look, we can have more THAAD, we can have more Patriots, Tomahawks, and all that other stuff. But to do that, it needs to be, to our actual interest, not for some endless, ridiculous conflict here with Iran. We need to be looking at Korea, Japan, the Asia Pacific, and say, these are the places which deserve it. These are the places here at home why we need it. And this is where Congress needs to step in. They need to set actual rules where you can't just be going around launching wars of choice and aggression. So we got to balance, like, I understand people are like, we don't need any more weapons. It's really not about that. What we do need to do, though, is to make sure that these ridiculous defense industrial companies, which are here in Northern Virginia, aren't printing billions of dollars at the expense of us as a taxpayer and making us all less safe. Like, we need a total reimagining. And a lot of the people I know in the Pentagon, this was their whole thing. That's the craziest part, is that all of these ideas, I know the people who thought them, and they work in the current Pentagon. Many of them wrote essays why we should not go to war with Iran for this exact reason. And now we're here. Can you imagine the prospect of having to further cut Medicare or something like that to fund the war with Iran, which again is the very likely possibility right now.
Yeah, because that's where the money is. I mean, the government is like missiles and healthcare.
Yes,
that's right. What we mostly spend our government money on. Social Security, that has its own funding mechanism, but that's largely, those are the two buckets. And so yes, this $100 billion, apparently it's going to come from somewhere. And that is the place where the cuts can and will be made. So that's the case that they're going to make to the American people. And, there's another piece of this. Like, I'm not a, deficit hawk. I'm not a balanced budget amendment person. I usually think that this, like, how are you going to pay for it thing is silly and is not the way that federal government, it's not like balancing your household checkbook. We print currency. We are the world's reserve currency, et cetera. So it's very different than your household budget. However, Yanis Varoufakis says he doesn't think the dollar as the reserve currency is going away anytime soon, and I do put a lot of stock in what he says. However, there are a lot of others who are like, things are going to move increasingly in that direction as the U.S., is this declining empire trying to throw its weight around the world, getting humiliated currently in Iran. And the Iranians are saying, oh, you can bring your oil tanker through the Strait of Hormuz as long as it's denominated in Chinese yuan. The BRICS countries have been, making their efforts to try to create an alternative currency. The war against Russia, the proxy war we've been waging in Ukraine against Russia, has also pushed things in that direction. And if the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency, then you really do have to start worrying about the debt. Then that is something that you are going to have to figure out, and there are going to be massive, massive cuts. So, the more that we spin up that debt in a war that is itself undermining our position of the war as the world's reserve currency, the more you are courting an absolute economic catastrophe for our own country here at home.
Yeah, and I mean, the reserve stuff is all important, and I actually think Giannis's point is good too, where he's like, look, don't write the obituary just yet. And because everything seems obvious in retrospect, and even Suez, in the time, nobody was like, oh my God, the British Empire is over. That's not really how it went down, right?
Yeah, it's only in retrospect when you look back and
in 1970, you're like, oh wow, like obviously that was super important. Right, exactly. So, I mean, I've talked about it before. Nobody in 1919 said, oh, the British Empire is over, right? They're like, actually, we've won. Yes, we're horribly, damaged, and we owe all this money to the United States, but look at all this vast swath of territory we control now in the Middle East.
We're just carving it up.
Bingo, exactly. But it ends up being a noose around their neck, right? And it ends up actually, after the Second World War, that's when they really wake up and they realize that the entire world is different. But those types of events are extremely rare. It's slow bleed. Like, if I were to guess that, the history of our decline, it'll start with Iraq. I think Iraq is going to be the real one, which you can look at the balance sheet. We tried to have a political corrective. How many change elections did we have? 4 since Iraq. So Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump 2. So we had 4 change elections of Americans being like, please get us out of this.
And that's just at the presidential level. At the congressional level, it's just back and forth and back of wave election after wave election after wave election.
That's actually a sign, by the way, of empire, is that you have a bipartisan, they're called like grandees in the British Empire, where no matter who changed in the government, everyone was still on the empire. And the whole point is that a bipartisan elite locked up in this has put us to this funding role where, as you said, the government is weapons and diabetic healthcare for old people. That's it, plus Social Security. That's basically all we actually do. There's 2% of the budget to weather balloons and Doge bullshit about the Department of, that's nothing. That's like a rounding error.
Yeah.
It's all Social Security, healthcare, prescription drugs, and diabetes for fat old people, and weapons.
Yeah.
Boom.
I mean, as an example of that, I've been looking into Doge. I don't know if you guys have followed these Doge depositions, which are really something. But in any case, it was the largest peacetime reduction in a workforce in our history. Okay. It was a huge cut in terms of the number of bodies in the federal government. It didn't matter at all. In terms of the cost went up. Okay, there was a negligible impact on the overall federal budget because that is not what the money is spent on. So they got rid of all these people and the spending went up because that's not where the money is spent.
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of people who run around with no understanding of that. They think that, if we just like cut our aid to Botswana or something, then, it'll balance the budget.
That was another one, debt servicing.
Oh, yeah,
because interest rates are going up.
But there's there's nothing we can do really about that. I mean, Trump is trying to pressure the Federal Reserve, and we'll see if that works. But, that's not something that you can cut in a reconciliation bill to fund a war effort, for example.
Exactly. But look, we have lived through these types of events before. So when we had Vietnam, we had stagflation, obviously. That was a horrific crisis that followed. Don't forget, Iraq. I mean, Iraq was a huge impact on the precipitating financial crisis. It seriously drained major parts of the economy. It juiced all of this ridiculous government spending. The Bush administration was throwing everything they could in terms of incentives to try and make the impression that everything was okay, and then it all goes bust in 2008. A lot of people don't actually remember how important Iraq actually was to the eventual crisis of 2008. And, I was just looking this morning, you got a 3-month high here in mortgage interest rates, right? Something like 6.8%, 6.7%, plus 19 basis points just from the last week. 6.7% is, that's insanity. That's really, really high. And yeah, there's a boomer out there who bought their house for like $100K who is telling me about how they paid a 14 interest rate. Not the same when the average price is like $500,000 here in the US. But we're going to have to, I actually think this one could genuinely trigger like a major budget discussion and political cycle in Washington ahead of the midterms. And it's going to be all self-inflicted. They have to pass it. Trump is going to go all in for war funding, which means you have to cut something, so the Dems can run a